We're back. Okay. Welcome to the Realm of Ideas is Free to All. This is episode 51, Artifice and Imitation. This is going to be a fascinating talk. I'm not going to say anything. Julie's going to do it, so it's going to be brilliant. Anyway, this is a series of ruminations we've been going over for a while. Basically started about a year ago. This is episode 51, so we've almost come full circle. Last week was a landmark number 50, so this is kind of going into the next 50. And we've actually planned out tonight to 63. So we'll see. And by that time, we'll probably be out to like 80 something. But this has been fun. It's a series of ruminations I do based on ideas that I had for a project that basically kind of ended up becoming this project. So I'm an architectural researcher, draftsman, and model maker. And I'm kind of joined by Julie, who's a painter and a writer and just kind of like speculative genius. So we had our preview on Wednesday, and I kind of was excited to read something from Whitehead's Science in the Modern World. Right? I gave you a tease into his chapter on the century of genius, and I kind of, talked about how much I get excited by the use of that term. And usually what I do is I give you something of the overall passage and then let you kind of ruminate on it. But in fact, what I did was I didn't do that. I talked about how Whitehead wanted to use this passage from Francis Bacon as the kind of like antecedent or the kind of like avatar, if it were, for his chapter, The Century of Genius. So anyway, what I talked about was that, in this case, it was the piece that I gave the quotation for. Oh, he talks about Hume. Hume was a very big impact on Whitehead. All right, so let's go back to this. Says, so I started, well, let me read a previous piece that I thought was very important. He talks about the previous chapters of The Century of Genius, and he talked about the antecedent conditions which prepared the soil for the scientific outburst. And he said, 3 main factors arrested attention: the rise of mathematics, the instinctive belief in a detailed order of nature, and the unbridled rationalism of the thought of the later Middle Ages. By this rationalism, I mean the belief that the avenue to truth was predominantly through a metaphysical analysis of the nature of things, which would thereby determine how things acted and functioned. The historical revolt in the 16th century was the definitive abandonment of this method in favor of the study of the empirical facts of antecedents and consequences. In religion, it meant the appeal to the origins of Christianity, and in science, it meant the appeal to experiment and the inducted method of reason, which basically, if we understand, induction is basically looking at things and coming up with a speculative kind of idea, hypothesis. Deductive is basically when we take that hypothesis and we try to define it well enough and then test it. So one of the things I think is missing now is that kind of wild speculative aspect that basically was, in this case, the part and parcel of that expansion of the realm of thinking, not just in terms of the system or the process, but just the elements that would be added into that process. It wasn't just the idea of kind of these great bondings of important ideas, like the idea of going away from a metaphysical approach to a kind of like more of a kind of empirical approach, and the idea of experimentation and inductive reasoning rather than kind of metaphysical speculation. It was the idea of the ideas themselves, the things that were being thought up. And I think that comes from the idea of not being afraid of speculation, not being afraid of kind of like that adventurous aspect, which I think, as we've been talking about recently, is very much missing in the realm of ideas in the present time. So anyway, Whitehead teases us by saying, my discussion of the epoch will be first introduced by a quotation from Francis Bacon, which forms the opening of section or century, ninth century of his the 9th chapter of the Natural History. I mean his Silva Silvarum. We are told in the contemporary memoir by his chaplain, Dr. Raleigh, that his work was composed in the last 5 years of his life, so it must be dated between 1620 and 1626. The quotation runs thus: "It is certain that all bodies whatsoever, though they have no sense, yet they have perception. For when one body is applied to another, there is a kind of election to embrace that which is agreeable and to exclude or expel that which is ingrate. And whether the body be alterant or altered, evermore a perception precedeth operation. For else all bodies would be like one to another, and sometimes this perception is some kind of bodies. Is far more subtle than sense. So the sense is but a dull thing in comparison to it. We see a weather glass. We find the least difference of the weather in heat or cold when we find it not. And this perception is sometimes at a distance as well as upon the touch, as when the lodestone draweth iron or flame naphtha of Babylon, a great distance off. It is therefore a subject of very noble inquiry to inquire to the more subtle perceptions, for it is another key to open nature, as well as the sense, and sometimes better. And besides, it is a principle meant of natural divination, for that which in these perceptions appeareth early, in the great effects cometh long after. So I'll read that again. It is a principal means of natural divination, for that which in these perceptions appeareth early, in the great effects cometh long after. Okay, then a quick analysis by Whitehead. There are a great many points of interest here in this quotation, some of which will emerge into importance in succeeding lectures. In the first place, note the careful way in which Bacon discriminates between perception or taking note of on the one hand and sense or cognitive experience on the other hand. In this respect, Bacon is outside the physical line of thought, which finally dominated the century. Later on, that's what I mean by the ideas of the ideas. Right? We got to the point that maybe because of the process, we were capable of going beyond what we thought we were capable of speculating on. Later on, people thought of passive matter, which was operated on externally by forces. I believe Bacon's line of thought to have expressed a more fundamental truth that do the materialistic concepts which were being shaped as adequate for physics. We are now so used to this is the best part. We are now so used to the materialistic way of looking at things, which has been rooted in our literature by the genius of the 17th century, that it is with some difficulty that we understand the possibility of another mode of approach to the problems of nature. Meaning, it's become so ingrained, it may become an obstacle at some point because it was so profound. And sometimes I think that's the point, is that the ideas become so profound that we become intimidated and sometimes overwhelmed by them. And given that as a pretext, that is the topic for tonight. It is artifice and imitation. So first we talk about what's new in Julie, and then Julie will basically talk about artifice and imitation. And fortunately for anyone listening, I will say almost nothing for the rest of the hour.
Oh, goody. You can be an easel then.
Ah, yes.
Bruce can be my easel for my drawing. So this is my newest science drawing that I have been working on just for the past couple of weeks at the Met. And you may want to zoom in closer, Mr. Easel. There we go, and angle it so you can see that's better. So what we have here is Middleburg, an incredible hub of innovation, invention, artistic, philosophical, engineering, scientific, mathematical, that existed in the Netherlands. It is still a city. I have no idea what it's like now, but an enormous roster of just does scores and scores of women and men, because um, the Netherlands was a very forward-thinking place. Even in the 1600s, you had
which is the
women,
17th century. So, in
which is
fact,
the
we
17th
didn't plan
century.
this, but in
Mm.
fact, you started this painting, this drawing before we actually came across the quotation and talked about
Yeah.
this. So, in fact, it's an interesting correlate because this was a place that in the 17th century was the seat of some of that transport of genius
Oh, yeah.
throughout the world of Europe and the kind of places that we had been able to reach by vessel. Anyway,
Yes.
so
This was the petri dish. This was the engine. And in fact, it was a very sophisticated soup, a primordial soup of intense innovation. And by that, I mean there were women in the 1600s with two PhDs. One particular woman, whose name escapes me at the moment, a native of Middelburg, had a PhD in physics and another in astronomy. She was also a poet and an acclaimed chef. So I mean, there were people of enormous skill and talent of both sexes working side by side, which is still rare and then extremely rare. Anyway, getting to my drawing that Bruce, the easel, is nicely showing up. What I have done is I have used actually a very large vase in the American wing in the mezzanine at the Met, which is a very funky piece with stormy seas, a number of ships basically trying to dock, as in Middelburg, hub of the Dutch East India Company, then a major trading port, which brought exotic goods from all over the world into the hands of the artists and scientists living and working and experimenting in Middelburg. So you had a really progressive and innovative group of Dutch vanitas painters, women and men, who had specimens that no one else had, which came into their port. And in fact, the optical lens was invented in Middelburg, as was the earliest microscope, as was the earliest telescope. So my drawing uses the actual plan, the actual site plan, the actual architectural plan of the walled city, the fortified city of Middelburg, which you see here, which then is rooted onto the vase. But the entire streetscape, the axonometric view of Middelburg, morphs right here into a scanning electron micrograph of the Cattleya purpurata. It's a purple orchid, and that is only possible because of what happened centuries ago in Middelburg, that we can see the seed pod in this incredible way, which then arcs up here and comes right down here. It always goes in a backwards way. Oops, sorry, it's a bit of glare. Which is in fact the entire structure, like a floating phantasm of said seed pod. And the only part I still have left to draw, which I quickly sketched in, is a super close up again of the spores in the seed pod. So you have this. Which basically is a portrait of an incredibly innovative place and the inventions that are, still in use, in spades today. So, shall I just launch in?
yes,
Okay, so it's already quarter after. So, okay, I would like to start discussing artifice and imitation. I'm going to give a few really potent examples that I don't think people have considered. We're not talking simply copying or plagiarizing or making a duplicate. basically, we are not talking the human version of a Xerox. We are talking of structures and functions in nature and science that are elaborate, that are complex on a microscopic level, on a chemical level, on a genetic level. Things that are kind of, how should I say, mind blowing. I will start with something that many people might not know about, the obligate brood parasite. It's fascinating. There are many, many animals that have other species raise their young, and those other species raise the young of a different species at the expense of their own young, who are often murdered and are never born at all. I will get right into this. Um, the obligate brood parasite, and then I'm going to make a parallel with what people are doing in the same way. So, the cuckoo is a bird that people have probably heard about, but are unfamiliar with its really fascinating, rather morbid way of getting its young raised. There are 56 old world species of the cuckoo bird, 3 new world species, all of which are brood parasites. So this is a system, and these are from my own original notes, a system which is dependent upon artifice, imitation at a very sophisticated and complex level. For those of you unfamiliar with the lifestyle ecology and mind-blowing habits of the cuckoo bird, they lay their eggs in the nests of other birds. Very often, the species of birds called passerines, which are birds that are sparrow like and have no genetic connection to the cuckoo. They share their territory. So, this prompted a metaphor of successful trickery in the human lexicon, which is the cuckoo's egg. When people in the know hear the cuckoo's egg, they understand that there is some measure of masquerade, of very sophisticated artifice. And in this case, I just want to say what's so amazing about it is there are some non-parasitic species of the cuckoo bird, and they lay white eggs. The reason why this would never fly and their lifestyle of brood parasitism would fail is the other birds would instantly recognize they're very large birds, and their chicks are many times larger than the smaller birds whose nests they place their eggs in. They have to mimic the eggs of the birds whom they are using for their own brooding purposes. So it is not one kind of artifice. The would you like
Nothing.
to?
No.
Yeah, the actual shell gland of the cuckoo bird has to produce eggs that mimic the color of the species of the bird and the patterns on the shell. And these patterns vary wildly. You have speckles, blue eggs, purple eggs, red eggs with stripes and splotches. It's quite huge. So, what would you like
No,
to
go ahead.
discuss? So, in fact, they are matching the colored eggs and the patterns of those of their passerine hosts. And I would immediately bring up a parallel, the Japanese sumptuary laws, which we've talked about very, very often, which were used during the Edo period, which, for those of you who don't know, 1615 to 1868 to control the expression of ideas deemed a threat to public decorum, safety, or morality, or were thought of as subversive to the ruling Tokugawa shogunate. So you had people who,
Question.
yeah, sure.
So safety was used as a term
Yeah.
in order to kind of censor free thought.
Oh, yeah. It was a pretense. I mean, yeah.
I haven't heard that
Oh,
before.
yeah. It's very interesting. See, the idea, and this idea is very prevalent now. I think you might have something to say about this. Is to give people the idea that they're in danger. If a government stokes fear, if a group stokes fear, how easily are people controlled? Very easily. A fearful population is a malleable and controllable.
Yeah. I hope we never see that in our politics.
So now who also is the arbiter? Who is the judge of what is moral, of what is safety, what's a threat to the very loosely defined term of public decorum?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So they said it was ostentatious and inappropriate. Who is to make that call? So just like the cuckoo bird, when people were going around in their kimonos, they had to look like they were very rustic, very run-of-the-mill, not expensive, not well sewn, not crafted of expensive silks and fabrics. Now, a pattern that is recognized as a fine garment would be banned. So they would put all of the fine patterning inside. If they had to paint or say embroidery was very fine and very, very sophisticated work, it was inside where only the owner or the wearer knew it was there. And things that hung outwardly, and there were many things, the inro, the netsuki, the obi, which hung off the belt, had been lacquer. Now, as we know, lacquer is hugely expensive, very time consuming, at least 40 thin layers brushed over and over, takes a long time to craft. That is not the mark of somebody who does not have very sophisticated taste.
Right.
And the resources to have an inrow of that kind of elegance. So a common wood one was then suddenly acceptable, except they weren't really wood. They were lacquer used, made to look like wood in the imitation of luxury.
Right. So in this case, Artifice took on the realm of imitation. Now, again, one of the things I think is important about this is that the things that Julie has talked about and will talk about are not taking these terms, artifice and imitation, in their artificial sense or kind of practical, abstract sense. They're basically to be seen as process in nature sense.
Very, very
good point. So the point
is
the organic aspect of this actually emancipates these words and gives them a tremendous circumstantial consequence, because you think about imitation, you think about artifice in an artificial realm, it can be kind of seen as kind of like arch or kind of pedantry or kind of pedantic or superficial, exactly, and a kind of a dodge, and it has a kind of an unhealthy kind of meaning. But in this sense, in the kind of organic sense, right, we see a certainly much greater consequence.
Very, very well said. Extremely eloquent and a fine point. We are not talking of a simple masquerade. We are not talking about a Venetian mask of a wild-winged bird, worn in the palazzo at a festival. We are talking about an evolutionary arms race, and that is exactly what it is. Think about what I just said about the cuckoo bird. The arms race is with the passerine hosts. Okay, think about this, and this will make your head spin. So as the cuckoo bird adapts, it it lays eggs that are exactly a color match for the host. And when the cuckoo chick, in their gigantic egg, which are always larger than their host eggs, they are the bodybuilders of the bird world. They are pretty massive. They're very, very strong. These chicks eject the host eggs.
Mm.
They hurl any chick that is born to its death out of the nest. This is not a kind, gentle thing. This is not a Disney moment, right?
Mhm.
So the arms race is the evolutionary arms race. This is the way I am putting it. Is what do the passerine hosts do? What do all these species do that are having their young murdered? Their eggs are destroyed. Their chicks are killed.
Mm.
They change the colors of their eggs.
Mhm.
And then the cuckoos rush to match that change. They develop a new pattern on the shells, and the cuckoos rush to evolve an imitation of that pattern. It is just fascinating. I'd like to move on and make a point about Ken Yakure, which is the name of the sumptuary laws. They were not only in Japan. Most people don't know they originated in early China. So when a society deemed its population was getting out of hand, uncontrollable, had their own ideas, they enacted a series of codes. And this wasn't one, this was over and over, like the evolutionary arms race of the cuckoo and its passerine host. So these sumptuary laws in China were based on consumption equals status. Now that's fascinating. I'm going to say it again. Consumption equals status, because here's what they were trying to suppress. And they prohibited publishing about current events. Now, what happens when you muzzle the press? You muzzle writers. You cannot disseminate ideas. You don't have any free speech. You cannot spread ideas. They said they suppressed what they called unorthodox theories. Now that could be any idea that they
this is not
didn't
something we
like.
hear
Right.
recently around us.
Oh no, hell no. And rumors and scandals and erotica. And to them,
Really?
yes, yeah, that was a problem.
No, it's
there.
funny.
Yeah, of
You know,
course.
it seems as if there's a certain
Yeah.
there's a certain commonality with what I would call kind of like detritus types. And there just seemed to kind of like this idea of trying to stop people from talking, about trying to suppress ideas, about trying to suppress speech. And you know, the idea that like one of the things that they always go after as well is the erotic aspect, the romantic aspect. I mean, I think
because it's visceral.
Exactly, but it also kind of calls upon the independence of the individual. The individual, as much as you want to pretend otherwise, there is nothing more individualistic about an individual than their kind of eroticism.
Yeah.
Right? I don't think I've met two people whose eroticism is anywhere near similar, and I'm not talking about going to the extreme ends of
It's
sexuality.
a fingerprint. Think about it.
That's true. It's a
It's
psychological fingerprint.
unique.
Yeah, it is. It is very, very much unique.
May I?
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a lot of notes. Now I'm going to jump to art, because this is always about art, and then I'm going to jump right back to nature. Trompe l'oeil painting. Now, I'm not talking about the Arcimboldo effect that is, making a man's head out of cauliflower and a carrot nose and, a cabbage jaw and a lot of books. Yes, it's fun. It has a surreal aspect. What I'm talking about was the real purpose of trompe l'oeil that most people are very unaware of. It's all about artifice and imitation at its fundamental level. Trompe l'oeil paintings originated in ancient Greece and Rome. They were a display of virtuosity, skill, and talent in a very real way. In fact, the murals in Pompeii, and I did a lot of research about that, they would imitate a window, a door, a hallway, a balcony to show architecture that wasn't present, architecture that couldn't be built or wouldn't be built or didn't need to be
Mm.
built. They were a display of exceptional skill, elegance, and taste, which brings me to a wonderful, very short story about an ancient Greek tale. You're going to love it. You're welcome to borrow the story
Mm.
at your next cocktail party.
Mm.
It is a contest between two famous painters in ancient Greece in 464 BC. Right after Alfred Hitchcock had first come onto the scene. So you have Zeuxis, who painted a mural with grapes that was said to be so realistic, so virtuosic, so expert that birds would come down and try to eat his painted grapes. And that was the true story. And he was challenged by one Parrhasius, who was certainly impressed at the birds who came down to pick at the grapes, only to find they broke their bills on the wall because it was simply a fresco.
Mm.
He did a painting that when Zeuxis went to see it, Zeuxis tried repeatedly to pull back the curtain on Parrhasius's painting in order to reveal the canvas. But the curtain itself was trompe l'oeil, and he won.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning he didn't even have to get to the painting. The painting was the curtain, and it fooled his rival to such an extent he tried to pull it back. Now, would you like to?
Yeah, okay. One of the
Yeah.
things I find, I mean, I remember Julie telling me about this, is the strangler fig. I mean, the
Oh,
strangler
strangler
fig
fig's
is an
great.
interesting
That's a
thing
really
because I
good
think
point.
in
Yeah.
terms of the situation, I mean, being able to preserve yourself and avoid predators by being able to kind of put yourself in a circumstance that's different than what you are is an interesting concept. But I always have found that, like, the idea of, this was that you are taking on the shape of another entity. You're basically replacing it
Mhm.
with yourself.
It's a
And
doppelganger.
Exactly. So this is a case where something takes on, it kind of overlaps, it embeds itself, it engages itself, and then it kind of consumes that thing that it's
Mhm.
kind of basically takes the place of. So the other piece kind of
And it kills its host.
well, that's just it, because it has to
Yeah.
kill it in order to consume it. But I mean, it's like it basically kind of like will be the replacement in the exact same location of that which it was.
Yes.
You
Okay.
know.
I'm going to leap into
Yes.
this now. Okay. Artifice and imitation. My theories in convergent mycology. You're all going to really love this. Think about, why do many of the highly toxic, fatally toxic species of mushrooms and fungi look identical to their tasty edible kin? And I will use one of my favorite quotes right now. There are old mushroom hunters and there are bold mushroom hunters, but there are no old, bold mushroom hunters.
Mhm.
And many a brazen hunter ended up on a dialysis couch and
Or
then
worse.
shortly died.
Mm-hmm.
You don't come back and there's no antidote
No.
to any of these.
Mhm.
They are that sophisticated. So here it is, explaining Dioscorides' double difference. This is a fascinating idea, and you can apply it to many things. This is a brisk gallop of interdisciplinary thought. And I'll say it again, double difference. So, is it about the unprofitability of their position? Is it adaptive significance? Think about it. I say it's both. There was an article who I will credit, one Thomas W. Sherritt et al. In 2005, a peer-reviewed article on the double difference. To deter their own consumption by fungivores, or those animals and insects. There are many who love to eat fungi and mushrooms before they disperse their spores, meaning they would be nipped in the bud before they can reproduce. That is the whole point. So the visual artifice and visual structural imitation of poisonous mushrooms of their edible, very, very tasty kin is underscored by a distinctive warning odor. And the warning odor, for those who can smell it, obviously humans can't because they eat them anyway. A lot of animals can. And the idea is they are protecting their kin as well as themselves. And in fact, people don't credit plants or animals with protecting, loving, sheltering their own. And they do it all the time. So the poisonous and the non-poisonous are both protected. Think about it. If the poisonous, if the poisonous caps and the poisonous gills weren't there side by side, people would just harvest up the delicious ones because we love mushrooms. And so, yeah, that's an incredibly good idea. So it actually does enhance avoidance learning by fungivores. Think about that.
Okay.
Enhance avoidance learning by fungivores. Bruce.
I have no idea what that means.
Okay. What that means is the fungus are teaching the fungivores to avoid them. Meaning those who would eat them are being taught, meaning plants are teaching animals. This is phenomenal, but plants teach animals all the time. It's Pavlovian. If you eat something and you die, your kin won't eat it because you'll be dead. And they'll say, oh my God, that was really, really stupid,
that's me.
Yeah. Don't eat that mushroom. It's a death cap. And you only have to eat it once. And that's the last thing you will ever eat. But then I would never eat the death cap. And that would save future generations. And everyone around you would have learned from that. So the mushrooms are teaching their predators to stay away, not just from the toxic species, from the edible ones. It's a brilliant stroke of artifice and imitation. These things really, really, really excite me.
Good job.
Thanks. Oh, that was a good explanation.
Yeah,
right?
it was.
You understand that. Should I go on to my third and final?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you like to add anything?
No.
Okay. No one's going to see this coming. Marzipan. Yes, marzipan. This is a phenomenal example of artifice and imitation, and it has a wonderful story of Italian nuns in Sicily. Okay, if anyone has eaten marzipan, it's not wonderful. I mean, it is, for those of you who don't know what it is crushed almonds made into a paste with sugar. And it's very easily molded and sculpted. You could basically sculpt with it. Would you like a tea?
No.
Sure. Okay. So what is fascinating is marzipan has been for centuries, since the 12th century, a showcase for the artistry of the confectioner and the host's wealth and refinement. because any host that would know enough
Mm-hmm.
to hire a confectioner to make these beautiful sculptural works of art
Mm-hmm.
in imitation of a completely different life form was thought of as very elegant, very sophisticated. And here's the wonderful story. So, marzipan as imitation of nature is a 12th century Sicilian monastic tradition. And this is actually artifice as problem solver. And this is why this topic has so many strata. So, the Benedictine nuns of La Martirana, which was a convent in Sicily in the 12th century, had created ingenious marzipan doppelgangers of fruit to repopulate their bare trees in their bare cloister to impress a visiting archbishop. How fascinating is that?
Wow.
So this historical episode that is not just an old wives' tale or an old man's tale or a mermaid's tale, but I wouldn't knock mermaid, they are real. This historical episode of novelty and ingenuity ignited a tradition which still persists in Sicily to this day and sparked something called frutti di martirana, which is a confection. And they are confections. They mimic figs and pears and apples and grapes and pomegranates. You can find them online. They are wonderful, and they're used in celebration of All Souls Day, which is great because guess why?
Why?
They have the soul of what they're imitating. Think about it. They have captured the very soul of that fruit. And these particular nuns, they sculpted these marzipan fruits to make their bare garden bloom and bear fruit. Would you like to talk about that wonderful story? And then I will finish with more artifice and imitation in culinary expression, which that is. I will segue to a continuation as a sophisticated means or device, I'm reading from my own original notes, to express the culinary expertise, the gastronomic skill, the knowledge, artistry, and craftsmanship. Let us look at my favorite holiday, Christmas, at the Yule log cake. Even those who aren't Christian must have seen the brilliant Yule log cakes. They have mushrooms growing on them made of marzipan. They have bark. They have lichen. They have insects. These are marvels. In French, bouche de Noël. These are the historical roots of shaping food to resemble its source animal. And I bring up the pièce montée, where you are shaping game bird meat in France in the shape of the game bird from whence it came. So you have a pâté of pheasant shaped like a pheasant. It's great. And you have duck rillettes, which are yummy, yummy, shaped like a canard or duck. And boy, are they marvelous. And a galantine. And for those who don't know, a galantine is very often shaped like the source from whence it came. You can have a galantine, a fish shaped like a koi, shaped like a salmon. It's really great. And then I will finish off with Japanese wagashi, a marvelous imitation of nature, avatar for the seasons. For those of you who don't know, they are made of chestnut paste, white bean paste. They are made of seaweed and sticky rice. They're mostly vegan, actually. They're very hard to find in this country, but they are made to imitate a yuzu, a chestnut, a frozen pine branch. They are really, really amazing. And then I will finish off with the pâté di campagna, the elaborate historical presentations used at feasts in England and in France. And there.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. So let's
Yeah. So we still have time.
we do. Let's kind of look back at this idea of kind of like artifice and imitation
On
and
to you.
how it
Yes.
goes, how it kind of moves into some of the things we've been thinking about. One of the things that I think has been an ongoing theme that we've been kind of talking about, and we'll be talking about it more, is the idea of what is the significance and importance, and I would say necessity of kind of original ideas. And I think, we talked about the fact that there's a difference between a drawing and a copy, and then a copy kind of like slavishly just kind of follows along, and basically may kind of like create a resemblance, but never kind of really capture the essence. And if it does, then it kind of goes outside of what a copy usually is, And I think the idea that the the shrimp or the eggs or the insects or the fruit and a vanitas may look to the point where it's deceptive, to the point where you believe it's there,
Yeah.
but at the same time is kind of capturing the idea of, we kind of might have tricked your sight. Is that the excitement of character that we look for in art? So in this case, we're dealing with some of the complexities of these things that actually can be at the aid of the artist. But in fact, not only is that the case, they can sometimes be left aside,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not boastful, and I really want to make this differentiation. It's not boastful as somebody coming up and wearing a blazer and saying, I got this for so much, and trying. It's not about that. In order to paint a cone shell to be pretty much an imitation of life, you actually really needed to research and study that shell. And that's what it really is about. It is knowing your subject inside and out, right down to its core.
Yeah, I would agree.
That's what I think.
Yep. Okay. So
Yeah.
how would you say, in terms of the circumstance you see in the art world, in terms of kind of things that are being created, what do you see the cleverness? Do you see the ingenuity in artifice and imitation?
Now, no, not at all.
Okay.
I see people copying, and that is a difference. That's not clever.
Right.
It's not nuanced. It's not layered.
Right.
It is not an intellectual exercise.
Well, we didn't talk about, we talked about
say.
the other day, was Maeterlinck.
Oh,
I
yes,
kind of look
please
at my note.
say, yeah, this is really important.
One of the things that I feel is, as an original thinker, I think one of the things that I found kind of suspicious about the fact that Maeterlinck was accused of plagiarism is the fact that I can't think of a writer who I would know, with the exception maybe of Dostoevsky, who was an original thinker to this degree. And everything that basically came from his desk had that same sense of originality
over and over for years.
So personally, in the case that a person like myself or a person like Julie would do something to kind of steal work from someone else, would be the ultimate. It would make no sense. The thing that I pride myself on is my original ideas. I look at the fact that, like, what an original thinker prides himself on, what the mantle he carries, right, is that of originality and authenticity of that originality. And it would be something that would be a betrayal of yourself. You would be betraying yourself. You'd be betraying what is sacred to you by doing something like that. So for me, it just seems as if
there's completely unthinkable.
There's certain things you could say, okay, I can see that person doing that. But I think no original thinker who prides himself on that as his kind of as his watchtower would ever desecrate that principle. Never. It would be something that would be it's not even self-destructive. It's kind of like, can't think about it. Like, it just can't see it as possible.
It's counter to his very nature.
That's it.
As it is counter to our
It's
very
counter
nature.
To his nature.
Yeah.
And it's just there's no way in which you can kind of see it otherwise.
And one would never plagiarize a lesser person.
And in fact, we have in our midst one of our great fans of our show, of our little ruminations here, has had that befall on him. We have a friend who's, one of our kind of fans here, and kind of like a friend of ours,
We're not going to.
no, exactly, who is an incredibly original thinker,
Mm-hmm.
and as a result, he fell prey to the criminality inherent in someone who is not an original thinker.
Right.
And in this case, when he was kind of like relaying the story to me, I was like, yeah, never doubted it. This, because this is the kind of person who will say things like, it's important for you to maintain your integrity and not kind of bow to the pressure of circumstance to kind of sway you from what matters. And I think, telling me that is always a good reminder, but it's like, I don't have to tell Julie to be authentic. Julie doesn't have to tell me to be authentic.
Never.
It's in our nature.
I know of no other way to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it was kind of like,
I don't need to look elsewhere for other people's ideas that I don't find remotely.
In fact, I remember, for me, one of the things that was always so flattering was when someone who was a rival kind of, or put themselves up as a rival of mine,
but they were never a true rival.
No, they would basically kind of like steal ideas. And I remember there was a Jay Leno had, like, I think it was like a Doritos commercial,
it was a Cheetos,
and it was like,
or
crunch all you want, we'll make more.
Yeah, that's
and I always
really
looked
funny.
at it like, if you are basically still fascinated by my old ideas, by all means, because I'm no longer fascinated by them, and I'll make better tomorrow. But I think that sense of like what I call a kind of like a gracious arrogance is that which kind of comes from that sense of, I will come up with a solution, I'll figure it out, and you'll see, so as we go towards these ideas, next week is novel utility, which goes back to the idea of the fact that the process by which form is generated needs to be such that it can actually generate novel utility. Novel utility is that which comes from the provocative artifact, as we talked about it, and is something that is dearly lacking in our kind of generative strategy in all of our forms, which is, I think, an ongoing theme that we have in terms of the fact that many of us artists across different fields, art, architecture, music, have gotten fed up with the banal kind of academic insistences that really are kind of shutting down innovation
and creativity.
Yes, exactly.
Real innovation.
Yes, exactly. And I think that sense of kind of like looking for those things is the kind of thing that, is what we do when we can no longer feel, in fact, that the issues that are kind of given to us as challenges kind of can in any way make us feel somewhat stimulated. We look to ourselves. As Emerson would say, we always should look to ourselves.
Yes,
but in this case, it's become very, 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 very clear that that's what needs to happen.
Yes, and actually, in a very interesting case of chronological turnaround, these academic institutions and a lot of supposed institutes of higher learning have created their own sumptuary laws to suppress original thought. And that's exactly what they've done. Under the guise of safety, under the guise of decorum, under many guises. But,
yeah, what was it? What was the other one? Agreeability.
Yeah.
Yeah. So many prominent institutions and Harvard have kind of found themselves in this situation where they're kind of like
they only will hire people who are agreeable.
Right,
they
exactly.
Only want students who are agreeable.
So, like I said, a lot of very prominent institutions and Harvard have basically kind of gone along this particular vein, and it's part of the what I would call the academic rot. And someone was asking me the other day about my own circumstance and how I kind of decided to move away, and it wasn't any specific thing, but I do remember noting the fact that when what they would call the policy of the department was kind of one of these things. I'm like, what does that mean? The policy of the department.
It's a sumptuary law.
It was exactly. So
That's
exactly. So what
it
happened
is.
was, usually what happened was the academics who, were engaged in this discourse were the essence of the way in which the ideas were generated within the department, until, of course, someone basically came and said, like, the department's policy is, and I'm like, we'll figure that out, what the policy is, because our discussions will lead to policy.
But
And
it will always change based on what they want
but
to
it will
suppress.
start with principle.
Oh, yeah.
So basically, principle kind of became policy, but in this case, policy kind of went first. And then what happened was the people who were the provocateurs were the first targets. Anyway, so
anything
that's
you'd like
it.
to add to my overall notes?
No, I mean, like I said, I just wanted to listen and hear it because I was so excited, and this was probably our best episode. And I hope everyone appreciates as much as I did. I mean, because I think it was it was dealing with a lot of the subtleties and nuances. I think sometimes there's a tendency to kind of like simplify things and things become kind of black and white. But this really talked about things that were subtle and were nuanced and kind of like, we're not just this idea of kind of like, kind of authenticity and fraud. Like it wasn't a binary thing. It talked about the richness and the complexity of the landscape. So next week is novel utility, which is a kind of extension of the provocative nature of the artifact. So the realm of ideas is free to all, my friends, and it's to the benefit of us all to keep it this way.
Without sumptuary laws.
Exactly.
Amen to that.